Towards the end of the year 2017, we remember how massive protests took place in Marina Beach in Chennai in the backdrop of Supreme Court's definitive ban against the practice of Jallikattu in the state of Tamil Nadu. Right? I was also there, part of the protests, not really knowing the complete significance of the practice. And it was only later when I spoke to the people and read Geertz in particular, did it make complete sense to me. It is a classic case of animal cruelty, as they call it, in the words of modernity, or apocalypse, versus that of preserving one's own culture or identity or essentialism on the other. Certain rational voices of the society did even ask for a more utilitarian view of, as it does not involve just animal cruelty, but also that of loss of human lives as well. But ultimately, what happened in 2023 verdict of Supreme Court is it not only uplifted the ban, but it also said that it is the prerogative of the state legislative assembly to define what does and does not come under the concept of cultural heritage. And of course, eventually, the Tamil Nadu State Legislative Assembly did account for Jallikattu as a cultural heritage of the state. This is also in line with Geertz. We will see shortly why. How he terms culture as a web of significance that humans spin among themselves. And here it is, as in every other case, it happens very locally, and that context cannot be imposed otherwise. Welcome to Think Sociology. I am Sai Bhargav, and in this video we will see about all of the sociological concepts of Clifford Geertz. As I always say, if you're preparing for UGC net set or looking for value addition for your UPSC answers, or generally looking for a better understanding of the society, I think these thinkers of sociology, 26 thinkers that I'm going to discuss in this particular channel, will be of use to you. With that, I think we can get started. Clifford Geertz is an American sociologist, or should I say anthropologist. He is arguably the most influential anthropologist of the 20th century, and he was born in the year 1926, 100 years ago. And his work still is very much relevant in this day and age, now that even we have the meme culture, where we have cultural meanings that are always layered, right? So in order to understand Geertz, we need to understand his his anthropological view of understanding a culture. Clifford Geertz, this handsome man here, defines that it is the job of an anthropologist to understand and interpret meanings that humans give to themselves, right? In any society, humans have the concept of culture, which is nothing but a system of symbols or a system of significance that humans give to themselves, right? Here, this particular term, web of significance or web of symbols, is important, especially if you're preparing for exams. This is, again, a keyword which we can remember for Clifford Geertz. Now, with this, I think we can discuss about the culture, right? So these are broadly the topics that we are going to see today: culture, and then thick description, and then Balinese cockfight. Then we move on to peddlers and princes. Then we discuss apocalypse versus essentialism. Then primordialism. This is more of a anthropology concept rather than a sociology. And finally, we will conclude with religion, right? To begin with, culture is defined as a system of inherited conceptions which are expressed in symbolic forms by which we communicate and develop knowledge and attitude towards life. You see, universe is very chaotic, and we need certain order in order to, live with a more meaningful attitude. So we develop certain symbols, so we develop certain conceptions, and we express them in a symbolic forms that we call as culture. Here, The function of the culture is to impose meaning to the world. And how we can see it as a web of symbols. For instance, all the brand logos that we have, or even the IPL teams that we have, where you have RCB versus CSK, where you identify with a certain symbol. All of this is nothing but part of the culture, right? And these are spun by humans themselves and will make sense locally to their own group of people. So in order to understand a set of culture for an outsider, especially for an anthropologist, so it requires an observer's gaze, right? An anthropological observation is what he calls it as an observer gaze. So we always tend to have our own biases, and we are not really neutral when we observe or try to understand another culture, especially if it is of a different time. And we have our own subjective biases. So in order to understand or interpret the behavior, unlike a normal gaze, anthropologists have to adopt an observer gaze, which he prescribes it to be viewed within the cultural context of that particular culture, right? You have to look at through their own lens. So this is the concept of culture. And in order to understand this culture, he gave a tool called thick description, right? Although this term was initially used by Gilbert Ryle, it is popularized later on by Clifford Geertz. Thick description. The word itself indicates that you have to describe something, but we are not merely describing what people do, but also their actions in the context of their own culture, right? What a certain action means within their own culture. It is only known to them. For instance, if a person winks and twitches, you cannot understand the difference unless the person himself explains it to you, whether you understand it from his point of view, whether it is just a social code of a joke that he is winking, or it is a twitch, it is a biological problem that he is facing, and therefore his eye blinks. Unless you know the difference, you do not understand exactly what the meaning behind the action is. So thick description is nothing but an interpretative methodology that is used to understand the context as interpreted by the actors themselves, right? So you have to get into the shoes of the actors and understand the culture through this concept of thick description, where you provide a complete detailed account of the culture, especially as interpreted by the actors themselves with their own cultural understanding of their own culture. You need to describe in order to understand it better. Now, the concept of thick description comes from his field work that took place majorly in Indonesia. Clifford Geertz traveled to Indonesia with his wife, and there he conducted several field experiments, and based on which all of his major studies took place. Now, the Balinese cockfight is also called sabungan. In order to understand the culture of the people of Bali, he took up this particular practice of cockfight as an instrument. The reason for this is multifold. One is it has got a symbolism to it, and second, it explains the social dynamics to it, right? But before even getting into the study, he realized that people looked at him with a disdain. They did not allow him to watch the practice. Of course, for one, that it is illegal, and also they were not really keen about how he would take it to the world as well. But he used this concept of cultural relativism here, right? When in Rome principle. So he adopted their behavior, and he realized that since it is illegal, they always fled the scene whenever the police arrived. and he did the same. So when they noticed that he is just like them and no different from them, and that's when they opened up to him, and that's when they allowed him to even watch and understand the practice, right? So here there's a subtle hint towards cultural relativism concept. When in Rome principle, when in Rome, you be a Roman. Now, getting into the Balinese cockfight in detail. So here we have to understand that it involves a lot of metaphors in the daily life of Balinese people. So they have references to cockfight. They call a skate person a chicken. So all that references have, in the cultural context, they have originated there. And cock is referred to as narcissistic male ego, and that is the symbolism for it. And we see that it is also a very important aspect to regulate the society. For example, it is nothing but you don't view it as a bet for money, that is gambling, as a person within the culture of Bali, right? So this is an outsider's view. They think the fights are primarily meant for money. But what is involved here is much higher. So they consider the fights as a part of esteem. So it is a symbolic representation of their social status, prestige, and honor. So all of this is considered much higher than money. Although there are complex betting involved in this. There is one major betting around important fights, around which there were several other smaller bets that are raised. And there are certain rules for the bets as well. There's a group's solidarity, there's a kinship loyalty involved. So you never bet against your own family or a larger kinship group. And there is a status politics involved as well, right? So this Geertz calls as meta-social commentary. So this particular dynamics of society can be understood only through an event like a cockfight. This is the significance of a thick description that we just saw a little while ago, right? Now, similarly, there's another study conducted in Mojokerto and Tabanan, which he called it as Peddlers and Princes principle, right? So, although the study was conducted in late 1950s, the book was published only in the year 1963. So this, you have to be very clear. 1963, especially if you're preparing for UGC NET, you have to be very thorough with the years and the books, because sometimes they'll ask chronologically which book was released, or they'll just ask as a match the following question, the book and the years. So these are some vague factual questions that you cannot skip. So coming to the Peddlers and Princes principle, he has conducted the study in two different cities, Mojokerto in Java and Tabanan in Bali. The first one has a majority population of peddlers, and the second, the princes. The peddlers are very much fragmented, and they are labor-intensive people, and they did all kinds of informal work, and they followed traditional social networks. They did mostly rely on their own independent works, right? They were very informal. On the other hand, we have the princes who lost their traditional power after modernization, but still try to use the pre-existing social status in order to acquire certain capital and technology. And this is the primary social differences that they carried. Now, what happens when money is pushed into such states? How is economic modernization, how differently is it going to shape up in such a varied social fabric? So we can understand that by this particular concept of peddlers and principles. Since they are very fragmented and traditionally oriented, the shift from bazaar economy to firm-centered economy was not really happening in the Mojokerto. That is where the peddlers were present. But if you look at the princes, that is in Tabanan in Bali Island, here, because of their advancement technologically, with their acquired social capital, they were able to modernize very easily. So this is the observation that Geertz arrived at, saying that the economic modernization is rooted in social and cultural context, right? And the next concept is epochalism. Epochalism is nothing but spirit of age. This he calls it as a progressive focus. So any developing nation, like India, for instance, it has two strategies to define its national identity. So either it can go towards epochalism, like in the vision of Jawaharlal Nehru, for instance, he spoke a lot about technological advancement, modernity, industrialization. That can be contrasted with essentialism, like maybe that of Mahatma Gandhi, where he called for village as an individual unit, where he said developing the villages will eventually integrate into the nation development, right? So this is more of a dichotomy that is involved here. The progressive view focus of epochalism focuses more on industrialization and secularization and modernity, while that of essentialism is an indigenous way of life, which is more of inward looking. It talks about local traditions and fostering religion more, and there is a callback to history and the glorious past. This, on the other hand, is learning about the languages of the world, like English and French, in order to integrate in this globalized world. So these are the two different strategies that nations adopt while in their developing stage. That is what is discussed under epochalism and essentialism by Clifford Geertz. And then primordialism is not exactly a sociology concept. It comes under anthropology, but it was discussed in the book 1963 Integrative Revolution. This is in fact a paper, not exactly a book. He has come up with something called primordial assumed givens. Assumed givens are nothing but certain primordial traits that people assume to be more important than the civil ties that are imposed by the nation. Again, during the nation building, we consider everyone as equal. All the citizens of the state to be equal, right? But we, according to Clifford Geertz, there are certain assumed givens where we consider people of our blood ties, or of the same race, or speaking the same language, or of coming from the same region, or sharing the same religion, or maybe the shared customs. We consider them to be more important for us. This is what he calls it as primordialism, right? If this becomes too strong, it may lead to tribal fanaticism, which is very much a threat to the modern national building, right? So this must be contrasted against the civil ties. Civil ties are fostered by the nation development, and it calls for equality among the citizens. And finally, we have another concept called religion. Religion, we know it was a concept that is discussed by several thinkers, most important of which is Emile Durkheim. Now, we have Clifford Geertz's definition of religion is very important because this has the components are important, at least in terms of the exam. I mean, the words, the vocabulary is very important, and it can be asked as parts as well. One, he calls religion as a system of symbols which establishes moods and motivations that create a general order of existence, and that is clothed in an aura of factuality that makes the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic. So this is the order. Right? In order to understand this, let's break it down. Religion is nothing but cultural system of symbols. So these symbols can be objects, they can be rituals or events that we perform as vehicles of conception, right? We use these in order to create permanent systems of long-lasting systems of moods and motivations. Moods are nothing but scalar disposition, like let's say how you worship, what intensity you worship. All these are scalar dispositions. And then you have motivations, are vectorial ethical goals, like what are you heading towards? You are working towards your nirvana or your swarg or the concept of heaven. You're looking towards your liberation. All these are vectorial. They have a direction. What are you looking for? What are your goals for salvation? What is your karmic goal that you're working towards? So these are nothing but the elements that are created by the symbols. And in order to achieve a general order of existence, again, like we discussed, life is very, very chaotic. We need to make meanings out of it. So we create an order, and this framework gives us an assumption that the world is very organized. And we clothe it with an aura of factuality. So in order to make the stories believable, we give it an aura of factuality to make it objectively true and uniquely realistic, and which ultimately makes the moods and motivations uniquely realistic. We believe in our traditions, we believe in our rituals, and this is partly, or I mean wholly, because why it seems realistic, right? We clothe it with an aura of factuality. This is the concept of religion of Clifford Geertz, and with that, we have covered all the major topics. Starting with culture, we spoke about how culture is nothing but a web of symbols that humans spin among themselves. This is very important. This is at least asked 3-4 times, quoting the thinker, quote-based questions. So this is a famous quote by Clifford Geertz. Culture is nothing but a web of symbols. And thick description, of course, it's a keyword directly related to Clifford Geertz. And then we have Balinese cockfight and Peddlers and Princes. We need to remember the names of the cities here, Mojokoto and Tabanan. And we saw apocalypsm, another concept by Clifford Geertz. Primordialism, not very important, but yes, Clifford Geertz. Religion, we need to remember the keywords. And finally, we have the books. All these are the important books, of which Peddlers and Princes is important. Interpretation of Cultures, 1973 is important. Right. And Deep Play Notes on Balinese Cockfight, 1972. These are the most important books. So with this, I think we covered all the concepts of Clifford Geertz. I hope this is useful to you. With that, I think we covered 4 thinkers so far. We started with Alfred Schutz, and then we covered Harold Garfinkel, and then Erving Goffman, and finally Clifford Geertz. We have 22 more thinkers to go, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Thank you.